I'd like to welcome you very cordially. I'd like to welcome you to the meeting for the analysts and investors related to the disclosure of the financial report of Tauron Group for the third quarter of 2018. I'd like to welcome both you present here, all of you present here in the room, as well as persons following our conference call over the web or via video conference. As usual, the key data, the key results and highlights of the last quarter as well as of the last 9 months will be presented by the management board, the CEO, Mr. Filip Grzegorczyk, as well as the CFO, Mr. Marek Wadowski, of the CFO of Tauron Group. In the second part, you will also have access to our experts, Director Dariusz Niemiec, the Director for Trading Operations, as well as the Director for the Controlling Director, Mr. Makieła. Let's start, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome you very warmly. I have a pleasure to present to you the financial results and operating results achieved by Tauron Group in the first 3 quarters of 2018, as well as in Q3 alone of this year. First of all, I'd like to discuss the general financial situation of Tauron Group. I will present the highlights, the key events that took place over time, implementation of the CAPEX program, as well as the results of the efficiency improvement program. Following my statements, Mr. Wadowski will describe the macroeconomic and market situation and will present the details of financial results of Tauron broken down by segments, lines of business. As far as key data for the first 3 quarters of 2018, we need to first of all emphasize that the financial results achieved by Tauron Group in the first 3 quarters of this year are stable and better than the market expectation, beat the market expectation. Moving on to the detailed data presented on the slide, it is worth noting, first of all, that after the first 3 quarters of this year, we posted a 3% increase of sales revenue, arriving at 13.3 billion PLN. The group's EBITDA was 1% higher versus last year, coming in at 3 billion PLN. We generated 853 million PLN of net profit, and the capital expenditures of Tauron Group came in at 2.3 billion PLN to upgrade the grid assets and the new connections in the distribution segment. We spent more than 1.1 billion PLN. Around 700 million were allocated to the construction of our flagship investment project, the Jaworzno generation unit. Furthermore, which is very important, we are maintaining the net debt to EBITDA ratio at a safe level. At the end of September, it came in at 2.24. The details on the debt and the financing will be presented later on by the CFO, Mr. Wadowski. Moving on to the operating data, one needs to note that the coal mines owned by Tauron Group produced 3.6 million tons of commercial coal. This output was impacted, first of all, by the mining and geological conditions that unfortunately disrupted the achievement of the assumed output levels, extraction levels, especially this is true in reference to the Janina coal mine. With respect to other items, other issues, the production and trading strategy with respect to electricity is generating good effects. Similar as in previous period, the generation segment generated good financial results despite the declining electricity output. It's worth noting the dispatchability of our units. This dispatchability increased up to 86% in the first 3 quarters of 2018, while last year this ratio was 83%. In terms of distribution and supply, electricity distribution and supply volumes, they are roughly flat versus last year. The next slide presents the financial data and operating data achieved in Q3 alone this year. Here, the trends that we observed in this quarter were similar to the ones observed over the first 9 months of this year. Let me remind you that the consolidated net profit was affected by the inclusion of the positive FX differences in the amount of 85 million PLN. On the next slide, we are presenting the summary of highlight summary, the key events of this year. Some of them are already described during the previous conference calls, earnings conference calls, Tauron earnings conference calls. Now I'd like to draw attention to the selected latest events. First of all, we'd like to emphasize that currently we are conducting negotiations on the acquisition of 5 wind farms with a total capacity of about 200 megawatts located in the north of Poland. A potential transaction will enable us to double the current wind capacity of our group. Furthermore, we signed a letter of intent with KGHM, the copper mining conglomerate, in respect to the construction of electric vehicle charging infrastructure and the development expansion of car sharing projects. This is in line with our pro-ecological policy, which is aimed at limiting and reducing the emission levels. An important milestone in the process of launching and using the funds of the Polish Development Funds, the funds to be used for the construction of a 910 megawatt unit at Jaworzno, was obtaining from the head of the National Revenue Administration of the APA decision, advanced pricing decision. This was the last document we were supposed to receive as part of implementation of the suspending conditions of the agreement with the Polish Development Fund. Let me hand over to Mr. Wadowski now. Ladies and gentlemen, in the first 9 months of 2018, we were dealing with favorable macroeconomic conditions. The electricity production was slightly lower, 0.6% lower. The consumption of electricity went up by 2 percentage points. The difference between the increase of consumption and the decline of production was covered with the growing almost 3 times versus last year imports of electricity to Poland. Electricity production was clearly lower in the renewables area, 11% lower. That was the result, first of all, of weather conditions, namely lower winds, worse wind conditions, and lower water levels in the rivers. It is also worth emphasizing that the period under review is a period of a quite significant increase of electricity prices, which was primarily caused by the rising prices of CO2 emission allowances. Sales revenue of Tauron Group were higher, especially important for the increase of sales revenue was the increase of electricity price. In the distribution segment, the sales revenue from distribution service sales were lower, which was due to the implementation as of January 1st this year of a new IFRS 15 provision. The change being that we excluded from both the cost and revenue the transition fee. On the profit, this change, there's no impact of this change, but in case of the sales revenue decline, this is a noticeable impact. The net profit for the first 9 months of 2018 was lower than last year. Let me draw attention to the fact that if this net profit were to be adjusted by the impact of the impairment charge related to the fixed assets carrying value as of the end of June this year in the amount of 388 million PLN, then the net profit would have been slightly higher than last year. Adjusted by one-off events, is flat. In Q3 alone, also sales revenue of Tauron Group was higher, mainly due to higher electricity prices. EBITDA comparable at the same level, practically flat. Key segments results indicate that still a very important element of EBITDA generated are the distribution segment's results. With respect to EBIT, It is worth noting that in the mining segment, during the reported period, we were dealing with impairment charges related to the fixed assets carrying value on the balance sheet. The total impact on EBITDA in the mining is 730 million PLN in the generation. However, we dissolved, reversed a write-down of 350 million PLN. Q3 alone proves the clear importance of the distribution segment for the earnings of a total group. In the generation segment, the EBIT was negative, which was due first of all to the CO2 emission allowances pricings. The changes of EBITDA in 2018 were impacted primarily by three segments: the supply, generation, and distribution segments. Similar in case of Q3 alone. Moving on to the individual segments now, let me present to you in more details changes to EBITDA in individual segments. In the mining segment, first of all, I'd like to draw attention to the fact that the situation, the mining line of business, is determined very strongly by the savings that both with respect to the capex and the preparatory works that took place over recent years. Now we are working very intensely on improving the situation. In the first 9 months of 2018, a particularly difficult situation we're dealing with at Janina coal mine. Of course, it was the consequence of, on one hand, of the geological and mining conditions. However, the short runs of the long walls, frequent retooling of individual coal faces definitely didn't improve the situation in that coal mine at all. Therefore, the result for the first 9 months of the mining segment were, first of all, the consequence of smaller amounts, smaller volumes of extracted coal. Our activities aimed at construction of Grzegorz shaft and deepening of 800-meter level at Janina coal mine, the broad capex program at Brzeszcze coal mine are aimed at restoring the output above 7 million tons. However, those activities, those efforts will bring an effect, will generate a result, but it will not be in the near term, more in the 2-3 years horizon. In Q3 alone, it's worth noting two important elements that may, to a certain degree, disrupt or distort the analysis of these earnings. The very result in the mining of Q3 is practically flat, with the output of 400 million tons lower. In Q3 alone, the EBITDA went up due to two factors which didn't occur before. The first factor is the impact of the impairment charges related to the fixed assets carrying value. As I mentioned before, at the end of June, we booked such write-downs. This write-down was on one hand included in the fixed assets value, so it reduced the fixed assets value, but the second factor where it was also included was the settlement of the preparatory works. On EBITDA, smaller depreciation or a larger depreciation doesn't have an impact on EBITDA, because EBITDA is the result excluding depreciation. However, the settlements for the preparatory works do have an impact on EBITDA. So lower cost of settling the preparatory works from the past led to the improvement of EBITDA in Q3 alone by 12 million PLN. We haven't dealt with such a situation before, because before we've never dealt with impairment charges in the mining segment. A second factor was the revaluation of inventory at the Brzeszcze coal mine, the amount of 80,000 tons. 80,000 tons. These are semi-products. Semi-products are valued in such a way, are priced in such a way that the unit cost of coal extraction is calculated, and the product at a price, sort of price is booked, of course, because in case of the low amount of extracted coal and the unit costs being high, the value of this product goes up, and it did go up. It has an impact upon EBITDA. However, finally, it is the value of the semi-product is adjusted. However, it's adjusted below EBITDA, because the EBITDA that we are using, the definition of EBITDA indicates that EBITDA doesn't include the write-down. So if the value of the semi-product goes up, and at the same time we are writing down this value due to the fact that this value is too high versus the sales prices, we do not take this into account in EBITDA. Therefore, the impact on EBITDA of revaluation of inventory in the amount of 24 million PLN in Q3 2018. The total impact of these two factors is 36 million PLN, and here on the graph we are showing it in the item coal production cost. Therefore, we managed to maintain this result at flat versus last year, while the coal output of production was 400,000 tons less. In the generation segment now, it is worth noting, first of all, the higher operational capacity reserve revenue. This was possible thanks to the higher dispatchability, availability rate of those units. The trading strategy in 2018 assumed smaller production and higher utilization of operational capacity reserve. It is clear that this strategy worked out. After we adjust for the one-off events, our earnings of result was flat. So the strategy worked out. In terms of CO2 costs, we can see a clear increase. We are showing the increase of the cost of purchasing CO2 emission allowances by 164 million PLN. Let me remind you that in 2017 we were dealing with one-off event, the transferring of the free CO2 emission allowances from 2016 for 45 million PLN, and this improved the result in 2017. If we adjusted this result for taking into account those 45 million, the total increase of cost of CO2 costs would be 120 million, excluding the one-off event. It is worth noting the fact that in case of a lower heat output, we practically maintain a flat cogeneration production, which demonstrates the result of our efforts aimed at optimizing the production in the heat segment. In Q3 alone, the result of the generation segment was lower, mainly due to the increase of CO2 costs. Here, it is also worth mentioning that as of January 1st, 2018, we changed the methodology used to calculate the obligation to redeem CO2 emission allowances. Previously, in 2017, we used the average method. We applied the average price. We are applying the FIFO method, which means with the growing, in case of a rising market, if the price of CO2 emission allowances are going up, the costs are going up as well. And they particularly go up due to the increase of prices in Q3 and Q4. If we were, just for comparison, but to apply the average method, the same as we applied last year, then the increase of the cost of CO2 emission allowances would be in the region of 70 million PLN, not 143 million as we have now. For the full year, it's all be adjusted and aligned accordingly. In the distribution segment, the main factor leading to the improvement of our result is the volume of electricity distributed, mainly in the B group. of consumers. As I mentioned before, we eliminated the transition fee both from the cost as well as from the revenue. It doesn't have an impact upon EBITDA. Nevertheless, analyzing either costs or revenue, you can notice this change. 750 million PLN is the total transition fee scale. It's worth to also notice the 14% increase of the capex in the distribution segment, which means that in the future we can hope to increase the regulatory asset base. In Q3 alone, the distribution segment also is demonstrating a growing volume of electricity distributed, which has a very positive impact upon maintaining a stable result. In terms of the quality regulation, quality-based regulation, the first 9 months and the Q3 were favorable as far as weather conditions are concerned. We are in line with the required targets, SAIDI and SAIFI, set by the President of Energy Regulatory Office. If by the end of this year there will be no violent weather or disaster type occurrences, we should be able to maintain those indicators at a safe level, and thus, in accordance with the regulations of the President of the Energy Regulatory Office, we should improve the quality of our distribution services. In the supply segment, it's worth noting, first of all, to see the growing competition and thus the pressure on margins. We don't see it fully in the first 9 months earnings, but you can see it and you look at it month by month of recent months. In the supply segment, a very important impact came from the increasing electricity prices. We didn't have a favorable impact upon the earnings, the results of this segment. Q3 alone in the supply segment demonstrates a bit lower result. Here also we have important impact was a growing obligation to redeem certificates of origin of electricity, and with the growing prices of those certificates, this has a larger and larger impact upon EBITDA. With respect to the financial situation, Tauron Group in the first 9 months of this year has a good, stable position, financial position. Net debt to EBITDA ratio is 2.24, a safe level as of the end of September 2018. The unused financing available is 5.4 billion PLN, which definitely covers is sufficient to cover the requirements for funds of the near future. In 2019, we are expecting higher capital expenditures due to the capex schedule at the 910 megawatt unit construction project, and we have sufficient funds to cover those higher capex in this on this project. And now let me hand over to Mr. President, Mr. CEO. Ladies and gentlemen, a few words about the work progress on key projects. And traditionally, we need to start with a 910 megawatt unit at Jaworzno, which is the largest project of our company, implemented by Tauron Group. After 3 quarters of 2018, we may say that the work progress on this investment project reached 80%. A very important stage in the implementation of this project is the commencement as of the beginning of October of the commissioning of this unit. We maintain our position that this unit will be commissioned in Q4 next year. Another important venture is the construction of the CCGT unit in Stalowa Wola. The work progress on this project as of the end of Q3 was 86%. We are also conducting upgrade works at Łagisza power plant. The work progress on this project is now 21%, and the completion of work is scheduled for 2020. We are also implementing the low emission elimination program. Its task is to reduce the smoke in the Silesia and Dąbrowa Górnicza conurbation area, metropolitan area. The project includes the reconstruction alteration of the district heating network required to connect new additional heat consumers. The project is scheduled to be completed in 2023. The other large projects are related to the mining segment. They include the construction of 800-meter level at Janina coal mine, construction of Grzegorz shaft at Sobieski coal mine, and the CAPEX program at Brzeszcze coal mine. In terms of CAPEX broken down by segments, generally we should be said that the CAPEX of Tauron Group in the first 3 quarters of 2018 reached 2.3 billion. Traditionally, the biggest CAPEX was spent on upgrading, refurbishing the grid assets and connecting new consumers, new customers to the grid, distribution grid. The total CAPEX in the distribution segment was 1.2 billion PLN. The generation segment's CAPEX reached 909 million PLN, with 75% of that spent on the construction of a 910 megawatt unit at Jaworzno. The CAPEX in the mining segment came in at 161 million PLN and related to the construction of Grzegorz shaft at Sobieski coal mine. Also, the Brzeszcze coal mine CAPEX program and the construction of 800-meter level at Janina coal mine. Currently, we are finalizing this efficiency improvement program, which is the 3rd edition of this type of program implemented by the group. Implementation of the program is in line with the schedule. The impact of the efficiency improvement program EBITDA, counting from the beginning of its implementation, the beginning of 2016, namely, was 954 million PLN, with 314 million in the first 3 quarters of 2017. The scheduled recurring impact is the increase of EBITDA by 400 million PLN, starting from 2018. The savings reached 586 million PLN, counting from the beginning of 2016, with 135 million PLN in the first 3 quarters of this year. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we'd like to finish the presentation of our earnings and the most important events and highlights of the first 3 quarters of this year. And traditionally, we'd like to invite you to ask questions, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'd like to invite you to ask questions about persons present in the room, as well as persons that follow our web broadcast, our video conference over the web. Please.
Dzień dobry, Paweł Puchalski, Santander.
Good afternoon, Paweł Puchalski, Santander. I have a few questions. Let's start with the most important one. What price hike of tariff G you are going to apply or you have applied? And the second question, important question for this year, what capacity value will you present for the auction that will take place in December? With respect to the first question, let me put it this way. All 4 large utilities, large suppliers, we all received, we were summoned by the President of Energy Office to submit by November 15 the proposal of the new tariff. Now we are working, of course, to prepare our filing to the President of Energy Regulatory Office. We are working all the time to make this proposal as good as possible. But at this point in time, however, it's too early to give you an indication, to give you specific numbers. The tariff should be approved by the middle of December. We'll be waiting for the results of this process. In terms of the second question, unfortunately, I didn't hear it. Could you repeat, please? How much capacity you're planning to submit in December for the capacity market auctions? We have certified units both in the general certification as well as in the detailed certification for the auction. We want As a matter of fact,
praktycznie wszystkie nasze jednostki w
practically all our units
udział, natomiast co do
to take part in the auction. However, in terms of details, such as auction strategy, auction approach, how will we proceed, we are not disclosing this type of information.
Bo usłyszałem, żeby ta
If I may, because I heard that the tariff, you want to be as good as possible, you understand that president of a stock-listed company is aiming to maximize the profit, means that the highest possible, yes? The tariff.
no i oczywiście, że
The CEO, president of a stock-listed public company, of course, is looking first of all at the earnings, financial results of a company. However, we have to remember also about the fact that the very tariff includes
energii elektrycznej, no i
many more components than just the price of electricity. We are working to submit, prepare the best possible tariff proposal. We will know, and we will know what will be the approach of the President of the Energy Regulatory Office, and only at that time we'll be able to say what will be the final level of G tariff next year. If I may continue, let's move on to the CapEx. By how much the CapEx will be in the distribution segment in the subsequent years versus 2018 on average per annum? And the second question, because you mentioned that you want to buy 200 megawatts, or you're discussing or negotiating, potentially you could buy 200 megawatts of wind capacity. I'd like to find out where you're planning to get the money for it from, and whether the potential expense or spending will be included in the covenants. How will you resolve that? With respect to the first question, in the distribution segment, we are assuming that the CapEx in 2019 should be comparable versus 2018, above 2 billion PLN. This may slightly differ, but it's not going to be an order of magnitude, so it's not going to be significant. In terms of the financing of wind farms acquisition, this is still an open issue because we are conducting currently the negotiation process, and depending upon what will be the outcome of this negotiation process, this is how we will approach the financing issue. As we indicated during the presentation, we have unused funds, 5.4 billion PLN. Possibly, we will use those funds for it, but irrespective of everything, irrespective how we align the financing, whether this is or configure financing, whether it's going to be the funds available now or we find some other source of financing, for instance, subordinated debt, irrespective of that, as I said, we haven't made a decision yet. It all depends upon the final outcome of the negotiations, and this is also dependent upon the price that will be negotiated. Irrespective of all that, we will not exceed the net debt to EBITDA ratio, and in this respect we are safe and will not allow for a large transaction to bring about any problems to our financial stability. So if I may continue this topic, because you mentioned that you have a 5.4 billion PLN in unused funds, but if we take into account versus the market estimated EBITDA, that would lead to a potential additional loan of 1.5. I would say net debt to EBITDA, you have 2.4 already, so you can use 5 billion. So in other words, the banks agree you to reach 3.9, because if you're saying that you can use additional 5 billion that you have available, the additional 5 billion would imply the net debt to EBITDA ratio close to 4.0. That's not how we're looking at it. We are showing the amount that we can use. However, our limitation, the moment where we see that we are not able to draw any more debt, is definitely the covenant of 3.5, net debt to EBITDA ratio of 3.5. But definitely, in our internal analysis or plans or intentions, we are not assuming even that we may go up to 3.5 with net debt to EBITDA ratio. So this amount of available financing just tells us that, for instance, if in 2019 we are repaying the domestic bond issue, so we have funds for that, because in the presentation you can see 2 billion, it's just not just this bond issue program. We have funds, but definitely at that time it would not mean that we would increase the debt, but we would just replace one debt with another. And definitely this covenant is a very important element that impacts our policy with respect to how we see the plans in terms of our operations and financial dealings. So we are definitely looking at it this way, that we may afford to increase our debt, our leverage, the way you presented it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please, more questions. We have several questions coming from over the internet. So in the meantime, let me go ahead with those questions. Mr. Piotr Dzięciołowski from Citibank is asking us about the transaction that we were just discussing. Why, if Tauron has money to purchase 200 megawatts of wind capacity, why don't they have the money to pay out the dividend? Although this is a much smaller amount. Mr. Piotr is asking also about the details of wind farms acquisition transaction. The next question is related to the mining segment. Are you considering handing over one of all of your coal mines to the SRK, the coal mine restructuring company, taking the fact that at the operating level these are sustainably not profitable ventures or companies? The question related to the venture capital, due to the fact that the question is very detailed, that the investor relations team will give an answer to that. However, with respect to these three questions, maybe we couldn't get an answer to them. Okay, let me start with question number 2, and I'll move on to the first one. We are not considering a transfer of our coal mines to SRK, coal mine structuring company. At the coal mines, we are looking the following way. That's true. Currently, as the earnings show, these are not profitable companies. But on the other hand, let us remember that the mining segment is at least 60% supplies the fuel to our generation units. As of today on the Polish market there is a problem with getting the right access to coal. The problem will be growing actually once the new BAT requirements come into effect. So we are looking at our coal mines in such a way that first of all this is the source of fuel for our units. Therefore we do not consider this option as you mentioned. Let me add to that we do not assume at all that the coal mines are sustainably or permanently not profitable, because after we complete the CAPEX program, the CAPEX projects that were described by the CEO at Janina, Sobieski and Brzeszcze coal mines, we will be able to significantly increase the output level, extraction level, and I think even earlier this extraction level will be higher, maybe not in 2019, however, in the 2-3 year term, 2-3 years time, this will definitely improve the results of the segment. In respect to the dividend and the wind farms, let me put it this way, we are looking at this at the Polish market in such a way that as of today we are dealing with a strong correlation between prices of CO2 emission allowances and electricity prices. This is as of today, because 80% of electricity in Poland is generated using coal.
z uwagi właśnie na wysokie
However, we are assuming that due to the high CO2 prices, the renewable energy segment will be growing irrespective
grupa Tauron będzie tym
whether the Tauron Group is interested in that or not. Therefore, we are assuming that this correlation will be weakening, which means more and more difficult conditions for the generation and the conventional generation segment. Therefore, we are looking for any ways
właściwie odpowiedzieć. No i taką odpowiedzią
to respond in the right way. And this is the type of response or reaction to grow, to expand the renewable energy segment.
coraz bardziej
And that's what we want to do. We want this segment to be more and more profitable.
rentowność naszej
Already now we can see that the profitability of our company is much higher than last year,
spółki. Uważamy, że
2017, and we think that this is the activity that is beneficial for the shareholders. We are
czy naszą
maintaining our position, our projection that we provided in the strategy that the dividend will be possible to be paid out starting from 2020. This is due, first of all, to the construction of a 910 megawatt unit at Jaworzno, and we think that this transaction of expansion of our renewables segment by buying this 200 megawatt of capacity, wind capacity. An additional element is the fact that we officially published that we are negotiating the purchase of a wind farm from Inventus. Inventus is a company that now is in legal dispute with Tauron related to the termination of a long-term power purchase agreement. And if the transaction were to go through, then we assume that this dispute will be resolved. This is an additional benefit for Tauron Group because this dispute that, of course, we consider to be without any merit, the claim to be without any merit, nevertheless, it still entails some risk. Thank you very much. We have a question from Mr. Christian Brymora from Beskidzki Dom Maklerski. Mr. Wadowski mentioned two positive one-off events in the mining segment worth 36 million PLN. Why aren't you adjusting for that the recurring EBITDA?
ponieważ po pierwsze
Because, first of all,
te poszczególne zdarzenia, to po
looking at the individual one-off events, first of all, one of the events
milionów złotych
is
to efekt
the 12 million PLN is the consequence of
jednorazowy,
write-downs. Write-downs are of one-off nature, but this effect is not a one-off event
ponieważ obniżenie
because
wartości robót przygotowawczych
lowering
przez jakiś czas jeszcze
of preparatory works value will for some time lead to the improvement of result. The second event definitely is a one-off, and I think that in this respect we will try to
przedstawić już przy wynikach
present this more in a more transparent manner when we present the full year earnings. Thank you very much. Anyone else would like to ask a question to the management board? I don't see any hands up, so I'd like to thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And today already I'd like to invite you to the presentation of the full year earnings in March 2019. Thank you very much and see you next time.